Mark, thank you for the kind introduction, and so much. Thank you so much too to Cato for hosting this event. The timing of it could not be better, as we really sort of debate the direction of the country and how best both control spending and grow the economy at the same time. That's what I would like to talk about today. I'm also honored to be on a program with Senators Bob Corker and Mike Lee, my fellow Texan, former Senator Phil Gramm, and distinguished academics such as Vito Tanzi and Richard Vedder. I'd like to begin by quoting the organizer of this conference, Dan Mitchell, who said, "Deficits and debt are the symptoms. Spending is the disease. Treat the disease and the symptoms will go away." It's important for everyone to understand the United States has a fiscal crisis because of excessive federal spending, and that constraining the growth of federal spending is a solution. Several months ago, I asked the Republican staff of the Joint Economic Committee to sort of analyze and survey a body of economic work, published economic literature on fiscal consolidations. Fiscal consolidation is not a phrase used so often in America, but has in Europe and other parts of the world for quite a while. And these are programs designed to reduce a government's budget deficits and stabilize the government debt as a percentage of their economy. And I asked them to study the results of such programs in other developed countries, our competitors around the world, over the last 4 decades. And the result of that analysis is a report that we recently released called Spend Less, Owe Less, Grow the Economy, which I'd like to go through with you fairly briefly. But before we do, and before I summarize the report's finding, let me show you 2 charts. I'm going to keep John busy today, because we're getting paid by the chart. We'll see how after the government shutdown that works. We asked our folks to take a look at the last 4 decades in the United States to track government spending at the federal level versus job creation along Main Street, private sector employment. As you can tell, the blue line is federal expenditures, the red line is job growth. What it shows is over the past 4 decades, there is no relationship between federal spending and job growth along Main Street. In fact, for each of those 4 decades, there's a negative correlation between them. Let's look at the next chart. We then tracked over the last 40 years private business investment and job creation in the private sector. As you can tell, the blue line is private fixed business investment, and what it shows obviously is a direct correlation, and this type of investment is very simple. It is when businesses invest in new equipment, new software, new buildings. What it shows is that businesses along Main Street grow. There is no substitute for this private business investment. Not stimulus, not rebates, and not even shovel-ready projects are a substitute for private business investment. And while there is great debate about the impact of stimulus, what we do know is that in the past 2 years, after having spent over $800 billion, in America we have 2 million fewer jobs than when the stimulus began. We were told if we went on that spending spree, the unemployment rate this month would be 6.8%. We are, as a nation, a wildly off 7 million jobs in projections after the stimulus occurred. So there is, in my belief, no substitute for business investment in creating jobs and in getting the economy going. As to the report on fiscal consolidation, there's 2 criteria by which economists judge these fiscal consolidation programs. One, do these programs actually reduce the government budget deficits? Do they stabilize the level of what a country owes as a percentage of their economy? This is the success criterion. And secondly, do the programs boost economic growth and job creation? This is known as the growth criterion. As for the success criterion, Spend Less, Owe Less, Grow Less provides clear and convincing evidence that if a government wants to succeed in reducing its budget deficit and stabilizing its debt, it has to restrain spending. Albert Alesina and Sylvia Ardagna, both of whom are distinguished economics professors from Harvard, found 21 instances between 1970 and 2007, where 10 of America's international competitors successfully reduced their government debt to GDP ratio by 4.5 percentage points or more, based predominantly or entirely on spending reductions. Andrew Biggs, Kevin Hassett, Michael Jensen, all of whom are from AEI, found that successful fiscal consolidations, in fact, and we may have a chart on that, John. AEI's economists took a look at these fiscal consolidation programs internationally and determined that the countries that were successful in reducing their deficits and stabilizing, reducing their debt, there was a difference between them. Countries that were successful in doing that relied principally on spending cuts in order to do it. The countries that were unsuccessful in achieving that relied, at least in a balanced approach, on tax increases as well as spending cuts. And I should point out that even within the successful programs, that 15% revenue increases were not from tax increases. Often they were from other non-tax sources, such as privatizing government-owned enterprises, asset sales, and user fees. So countries with successful programs on how to reduce their debt not only relied on spending cuts, they did not increase taxes, especially marginal income tax rates or rates on business or capital. While spending reductions were important to successful budget deficit reductions, spending reductions are even more important for achieving the growth criteria, for getting the economy moving. For example, John. Neighboring Canada shrank its total government spending by 12.8 percentage points of the GDP between 1994 and 2006 and boosted its annual economic growth from under 1% to a pretty robust 3.4% average over the next 12 years. You can see the growth in that chart there. Sweden, their economy was actually shrinking in the early 1990s after reducing its government spending by over 11 percentage points of GDP. Sweden's negative growth economy revived to an average of 3.5% over about a 10-year period. New Zealand did the same. New Zealand did the same. Fairly robust economy. Deficits in spending grew. They readjusted their spending and revived a fairly strong economic growth. And one point I want to make, these countries, Sweden, Canada, New Zealand, they're not alone. Alcina and Ardagna found 26 episodes in 9 developed countries, countries with developed economies like ours, where reducing government budget deficits and debt through spending cuts provided a large boost to their economic growth in the first 3 years after they began their fiscal consolidation. In fact, the average growth for those countries was not a minor increase in economic growth. They shot the top quarter of developed countries in economic growth. So spending cuts translated to economic growth. That's perhaps the most important finding of the report. As you know, while most economists agree countries that reduce their deficits and debt boost their economic growth over the long term, what this report shows is analyzing these economic studies, reducing federal spending can boost economic growth and job creation in the short term as well. And the reason, I think, is fairly common sense, as these studies show. What happened was businesses no longer expected the government to levy large tax increases in the future to pay for excessive spending, so private business investment grew. They invested in the buildings, equipment, software, and as we know, that drives job creation. Secondly, households, also recognizing that they would have more permanent disposable income in the future without facing those higher tax increases, felt comfortable in their spending, and they began buying larger ticket items such as homes and automobiles. And a point I would like to make, because it raised itself immediately, is so what type of spending cuts create this type of growth? one key point: not all spending cuts are the same when it comes to job creation. What these economic studies showed, that if you want to grow the jobs in the short term and job creation to maximize it, the spending reductions must be large, credible, and difficult to reverse. Spending cuts must be large, credible, and difficult to reverse once made. The savings that produce the greatest economic growth include right-sizing the government workforce and its compensation, eliminating duplicative programs and agencies, eliminating subsidies to businesses, and reforming and reducing transfer payments to individuals. So they're right-sized like a business, right-sized their workforce, eliminated the programs that duplicate and waste money. They eliminated the subsidies to businesses and reformed their entitlements. And in the area of entitlements, what I thought was interesting was the study found the evidence of strong economic growth from reforming the government pension and health care plans to make them sustainable and solvent, even when the reforms were phased in over time and didn't affect existing beneficiaries. So programs that tackled entitlements in a credible way, even if they didn't touch those on it today and phased in those reforms, had the effect of growing the economy or helping boost the economy in the short term. Our point is that ample real-life data proves there are significant economic growth and job creation benefits that accrue from reducing spending and reforming entitlement programs to restore their sustainability for future generations. Earlier this week, the Budget Chairman Paul Ryan unveiled his Path to Prosperity, unveiled it Tuesday. It clearly meets the test, the spending reduction test, that must be large, credible, and difficult to reverse once made to boost economic growth. Congressman Ryan's budget tackles the medical entitlements that are driving federal spending higher. It attacks corporate welfare by phasing out government guarantees to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, eliminates subsidies for green energy, and reduces ag subsidies by $30 billion over 10 years. His budget rolls back non-security discretionary spending to its 2008 level and then freezes it for 5 years. Part of that freeze includes adopting a number of the recommendations from the President's Fiscal Commission to eliminate waste and achieve real savings, for example, by reducing non-defense federal auto fleets by 20% and selling surplus real estate. Congressman Ryan's budget eliminates agencies and programs identified by the GAO recently as wasteful and duplicative. That alone saves nearly $100 billion over the decade. And Chairman Ryan's budget reduces the federal workforce by 10% gradually the next 5 years, mainly through attrition, by hiring only one new federal employee for every 3 who leaves or retires. Chairman Ryan's budget freezes federal pay through 2015, and together those proposals save about $375 billion over the next 10 years. Moreover, Congressman Ryan's budget envisions a pro-growth tax reform that lowers the top income tax rate for both individuals and corporations to 25%. So in summary, Congressman Ryan's budget is a fiscal consolidation plan that would grow the economy. As I conclude, one measure of this report's influence is that Dr. Paul Krugman has repeatedly attacked it in his blog and in his column in the New York Times. I always like to think if he's attacking me, I'm on the right track. Dr. Krugman, he claimed the authors of this report were clearly aware that the evidence no longer supports their position that restraining government spending can boost private business investment, economic growth, and job creation, because, quote, they added weasel words to cover themselves. They added weasel words to cover themselves, like confidence effects can boost GDP growth rather than will boost GDP growth. And I can't help but thinking, surely Dr. Krugman understands the benefits from good economic policies can be overwhelmed by external events in the short term. For example, our economy after 9/11 affected by that, the Australian and New Zealand economies slowed by the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s. So the weasel words to which Dr. Krugman refers recognizes that reality. And in fact, the studies were so diverse and so varied and eliminated a number of those external factors as it went about its work, that just the sheer number of these studies and the credibility of the economists that did it should provide to us in America, as we look at our future path, which direction to go, should give us great confidence that cutting federal spending will not only help resolve our nation's fiscal problems, but also help American families by boosting economic growth and job creation. In closing, I'd like to add an observation about the United States. Many of our Democratic friends on Capitol Hill are very fond of identifying the late 1990s as a period of rapid job growth in America. What is often left out of that discussion is that the size of the federal government relative to the economy shrank during that period. From fiscal year 1992 to 2001, federal outlays declined by just under 4% of our economy, from 22% roughly to 18.2%. The civilian workforce also shrank from a little over 2.3 million to under 2 million, a 10% reduction at the time. And so those today who say any cut in the federal government will damage the economy can probably look just to a decade or so ago to see that that is not necessarily the case. In fact, in this recovery, with $2 trillion of capital sitting on the sidelines, it's critical for us to restore the confidence for business investors to allow that capital to flow back into our economy to create the jobs that, in fact, we are so long overdue in pursuing. So far, President Obama, I think, has stressed the risk of reducing America's deficits and debts right now, but he ignores the risk of delay. For America's economic future, it really is time to spend less and owe less. That is the lesson of our international competitors. It's a lesson we ought to heed as a nation. So, Mr. Perry, with that, I'd be happy to stop and take some questions at this time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes for a couple questions. Back there in the row, right back there, yeah.
I'm Mary Chris McGowan. Thank you for taking my question. I had a question even from the beginning. We have been talking about lowering spending, and I really believe that we should do that. And we quoted going down to 22% or 19%, even better, as a percentage of GDP. But I didn't hear anything of what would be the minimum percentage of revenues as percentage of GDP to accomplish our goals. You have a graph with a 15% there, but I don't see any kind of a study for our economy right now. Thank you.
You know, there have been a number of studies done on what is the optimal size of government that actually encourages the optimal size of the economy. Those figures range normally in the 17.5% to 18% range. Historically, our revenue's been in around about 19 or so percent historically in the United States. And interestingly enough, no matter what Washington does to adjust the interest rates up or the tax rates up or down, the same amount of revenue tends to come in. People and businesses adjust their behavior to go with higher tax rates, so the revenues that are always projected to come in usually fall short. My view is that optimal size of government ought to be somewhere in that 18% range. And we ought to, even with an aging workforce, I think, or an aging population, I think that's possible. Congressman Ryan's budget, if you've looked at the long term, comes very close to those levels, goes to and below our national average over time. What are your thoughts? Do you think that that goal of that range is an appropriate one?
Really, I don't think revenue is a variable as relevant as spending. I really believe that. I think that spending has the second connotation of helping with economic growth. So it doesn't matter really if revenue falls below, let's say, 18%. That's my personal opinion, because spending, lower spending, that you create economic growth, and that will compensate for any losses or potential losses of 1 or 2% in revenues. That's what I think.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, right behind, right there.
Rick, Are there any major tax breaks that ship jobs overseas, and what's your view on the currency devaluation in China?
You know, I think we have a terrible tax code for competing and winning overseas. We are one of the few competitive countries with a worldwide taxing system. We just a few years ago, that puts us at a competitive disadvantage in a major way. We are in effect double taxed in many of our instances. It's why we have a very complicated corporate tax code to try to deal with that, but it fails, I think, in making us competitive also. Our competitors have ripped a page from our playbook on lower corporate taxes, where we once led our OECD colleagues by a pretty healthy point. We now trail them in the corporate tax rates by a pretty healthy amount. And so I think it's critical that we reform our tax code, especially in international tax area. Congressman Dave Camp, Chairman of the Ways and Means, has made that a priority for his committee. You're going to see over the balance of this year a number of hearings held where we identify what the consequences of that tax code, what that consequences are, and how we deal with it. So, yeah. Oh, on currency, I think it grants China a competitive advantage, but it is not the silver bullet I think many make it out to be. As chairman of the trade subcommittee, and there's no question that the Chinese currency needs to appreciate over time. We're going to continue to keep pressure on them and to work with the administration to continue to pressure them as well. On the trade subcommittee, though, I can tell you that we're no longer going to look at China just through a currency vacuum. We think there are a number of issues that impede our ability to sell our goods and services into China, from indigenous innovation, directed subsidies, lending, the restrictions on rare earth minerals, all of which are pretty effective non-tariff barriers to the U.S. We're also not only going to push them to become a responsible stakeholder in the global trading system, but we're urging the White House to restart negotiations on a bilateral investment treaty, which were stopped. We think that's important to provide our investors protections overseas in the Chinese market. So bottom line is the China currency issue is important, but it is not the only important issue in dealing with that relationship.
One more?
Hi, Senator.
We have time for one more? Okay. Oh, okay, down in the front row. Sorry, I didn't see you.
We keep hearing all the time about a $14.3 trillion national debt. But what about the actual national debt when we include what they have taken out of the Social Security Trust Fund and misappropriated, so that we will have to collect that tax again? I've been drawing that tax for 27 years because I'm 91 years old. So I've taken out one hell of a lot more than I put in. The system has got to be changed. I have 2 great-grandchildren in college, and, well...
Can I take you to Capitol Hill for just a minute and march you around the country because you get it. Those unfunded liabilities obviously unsustainable. They're almost too big to imagine in cost. That's why I think
somewhere out of this place, Cato, that debt is, or something in the order of 15.3 trillion,
yeah,
which would make our national debt twice what they keep coming over the systems.
Yes, sir. I'm proud of Paul Ryan's budget. It is an adult conversation on our entitlements, on Medicare and Medicaid especially, and sets the table for Social Security reform as well. We can't. We have more charts to show you, but you've heard it from others. You'll hear it from Senator Graham as well. That we can't keep ignoring. these entitlements. One, to ignore them at all threatens them by themselves, but setting up a new system for those who are 54 and younger to make those programs sustainable. We can't keep putting that off. I was disappointed it wasn't in the President's budget, that there's been no real proposal anywhere on Capitol Hill from our colleagues across the aisle, but now's the time to move on those. And Paul Ryan has laid out, I think, some awfully solid, sound approaches to do it. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm looking forward to hearing Senator Graham's comments as well. He was key to me running for and serving in Congress, and still one of the brightest minds around. I really appreciate Cato's leadership on fiscal responsibility in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Brady. All right. Thank you very much. All right.